in the horror genre. I'm your host, Nicole, and it's time to share another dark tale. Welcome back, friends and weirdos. I am here today with another installment of Fundamental Frights, and I'm going to be discussing Sinister from 2012. I have loved this movie since I saw the very first trailer and have never really fully discussed it, so now is the time. But before I get into the film discussion today, I do want to take just a second to discuss a couple of little side projects that I have going on. The first one is Macabre Moods, which is a playlist on my YouTube channel where I am creating these sort of long-form ambient soundscapes from movies. And I was inspired to do this because I like to listen to soundtrack type stuff when I read. And I listened to this one. It was like a 3-hour track of like rainy night in a jazz bar. And I thought, a lot of times I love to listen to horror soundtracks, but there'll be like a few really like nice, calm, vibey ones. And then there's like a real intense song. And so I was like, wouldn't it be nice if some of our favorite horror movies, like we just had a long form, just vibe of that movie. And so I've started playing around, making a few of those. I've done one for The Shining. I've done one for Silent Hill. I've done one for Texas Chainsaw, and I have one coming up later this month that is Midnight Mass. So if you like ambient music, if you like horror soundtracks, check it out. Like I said, you can check it out on my YouTube channel, and it's its own playlist. You can also listen to it on Spotify, but I don't know if it's going to survive on Spotify because I am cutting in proprietary music, like from soundtracks. YouTube will allow you to do that as long as you don't monetize, and I don't. But Spotify is a little bit pickier about copyrighted material, and so I don't know if it's going to survive on Spotify. But again, it's called Macabre Moods, so look it up if you're into such things. And then another side project I have is not related to podcasting or sound at all. It's a crafty project. I am venturing into the world of candle making. And I am doing this because I have loved candles for a long time. But over the past couple of years, I have found that quite often store-bought, mass-produced candles give me a headache more often than not. And so I started looking into just what it would take to pour my own candles, which is fun because I get to pick my own fragrances. And like any good millennial, I can't just have a hobby. It has to be a side hustle, I guess. So I'm going to be making little small batches of things that I love and selling them probably on Etsy. And they're going to be under the Light and Shadow brand. So they will be not full on horror, but vaguely spooky, moody kind of fragrances. And the store is going to be open mid to late August. I'm shooting for mid-August. I'm just waiting for some materials to get here. So anyway, if you like candles, if you are into crafty things, please check that out. I will be probably cross-posting all my candle stuff on the podcast channel. So if you're not into it, hopefully it's not annoying. It's not going to be all the time. But when the store opens and, when I launch new fragrances and such, you will see it. So if you're already following Light and Shadow Pod, you're good to go. So thank you for indulging me in a little bit of advertisement for my other stuff. I know a lot of creative people, we go down these tangents, and the whole reason I started this podcast is because I'm a graphic designer, so visual arts has always been my jam. But podcasting has always been really fun because it's a totally different creative outlet from like my day job. And so I just continue to find little rabbit trails to explore and things to try. And I find that it brings me a lot of joy and satisfaction. And of course, anytime I can share whatever I'm currently into with other people, I'm always happy to do so. So yeah, check out Macabre Moods. Check out Light and Shadow Supply, which is the name of the candle company. And you know what? Enough of that. So why am I talking about Sinister as part of the Fundamental Frights series? I've heard a lot of positive feedback about this movie over the years, so people like it. But I think I'm one of the only people who really loves it. There is something about this movie that really creeps me out, really strikes a chord. It also feels very personal because if I was going to make a horror film, I would want it to be like Sinister. I would want it to feel like Sinister. This movie is big on vibes. It excels at putting the audience into a very specific atmosphere, and that carries a lot of weight with me. And while I do think this is an almost perfect movie for me, I do have a couple criticisms I want to discuss. So without further ado, let's spool up the film and roll tape on Sinister.
New details today in the grisly murders of a local family found earlier this week.
I didn't want to move here.
We couldn't afford to live in the old house anymore. Plus, the new story I'm writing is here.
Is the story a good one this time?
I'm gonna write the best book that anybody's ever read. I got a really good feeling about this.
You gotta be kidding me. Family hanging out. Barbecue 79. That's the family who lived here.
You think these are serial murders?
I don't know. First one I found dates back to the 60s.
The only link between all these cases is the symbol.
The symbol is associated with a pagan deity named Bagul. He consumes the souls of human children.
I have never been onto something this big before.
Early Christians believed that Bagul actually lived in the images themselves and that they were gateways into his realm. Children exposed to the images were especially vulnerable to Bagul's abduction.
Sweetheart, what are you doing?
Painting. I wanted to paint her picture.
Who are you talking about?
Stephanie. She used to live here.
What's the matter? What's happened?
Get the kids, pack the car. We have to leave here now.
True crime writer Ellison Oswalt moves his wife Tracy and their two children, Trevor and Ashley, to the small town of Chatford, Pennsylvania. Unbeknownst to his family, their new home is the site of a grisly unsolved murder. The Stevenson family was hanged in the backyard, and their youngest daughter, Stephanie, vanished without a trace. Ellison's goal is to use the case for his next book, hoping to revive his struggling career after his only success years earlier. In the attic, Ellison discovers a box containing a projector and several Super 8 film reels labeled as home movies. When he watches the reels, he's horrified to find that they depict different families being murdered in gruesome ways, including being drowned in a pool, burned in a car, run over by a lawnmower, and stabbed in their beds. There's also a reel that depicts the Stevenson family hanging. The murders span decades, and in each case, the killer is unseen, presumably the person behind the camera. Ellison chooses not to go to the police, fearing it would derail his book and potential fame. He begins researching the footage obsessively, drinking heavily, and suffering nightmares. A strange symbol appears in each film, along with a creepy, pale figure he later learns is called Mr. Boogie. He also connects the footage to the 1998 murder of the Miller family from St. Louis and the disappearance of their son, Christopher. One night, after hearing noises in the attic, Ellison finds drawings of the murders on the lid of the projector box with Mr. Boogie present in each one. Meanwhile, the family is also experiencing unsettling encounters. Ashley sees a ghost girl in her room, and Trevor has night terrors. Ellison reaches out to a local deputy, nicknamed Deputy So-and-so, for help, and they discover that each murder happened in a different town, always after the family had moved from the previous crime scene. One child always disappeared afterward. Through an expert in the occult, Professor Jonas, Ellison learns that the symbol is linked to Bughuul, a pagan deity known as the Eater of Children. Bughuul supposedly lures children away from their families and consumes their souls over time. Jonas also warns that images of Bughuul act as a gateway for him to influence or possess children. Ellison continues to feel unsettled in the house and uncovers that Ashley has drawn Stephanie Stevenson, whom she claims to see, and painted the murder scene on her wall. That night, he again hears noises coming from the attic, and upon investigation, finds a group of ghost kids watching films in the attic. Suddenly, Bughuul appears on screen, then manifests in front of Ellison. Terrified, Ellison destroys the projector and film in the fire pit in the backyard, and the family flees back to their old home. While unpacking, Ellison gets another call from Professor Jonas. He sends more details about Bughuul, including ancient drawings featuring a scorpion, snake, and a dog, animals that Ellison has encountered throughout the ordeal. Later, the projector and reels Ellison destroyed back at the Stevenson house mysteriously reappear in the attic of the current house, along with a new reel labeled Extended Cut Endings. Before Ellison can watch these, Deputy So-and-so calls with a revelation. Each family was murdered after leaving the haunted house, meaning Ellison has unknowingly moved his family into the final phase of the cycle. In watching the extended cut endings, Ellison discovers that the films weren't just documenting the murders, they were created by the missing children, each one now revealed to be the killer under Bughuul's influence. Ellison suddenly feels lightheaded after drinking from his coffee mug. He discovers a note from Ashley saying goodnight before passing out. He awakens bound and gagged with his wife and son. Ashley, possessed and holding the Super 8 camera, tells her father she's going to make him famous again and proceeds to murder the family with an axe. Ashley uses their blood to draw on the walls pictures of the murders and Bughuul's symbol before doodling the dismembered bodies on the film reel box. She plays back the footage of the killing, and as it ends, Bughuul emerges, lifts her into the film, and disappears with her. The final shot shows the box of films sitting in the attic, now including a new reel. House Painting 12. So before I dig into this film, I want to talk a little bit about the director, Scott Derrickson. He has done a few notable things. He directed Hellraiser Inferno, which I think might have been his first movie. And, you know, the Hellraiser franchise is notorious for some pretty terrible sequels. And Inferno is, I think, one of the better ones, one of the less outlandish ones. He also directed The Exorcism of Emily Rose, which when I saw it in theaters. Really loved that movie. I went and saw it with a group of friends, and it really, really freaked everybody out. I think I was the only real horror fan in the group. And I even had one friend be like, I'm coming to church with you on Sunday. He did not join me for church on Sunday, but I think he meant it at the time. Like, it was just a very unsettling movie for my friends. And I think that movie has gained a lot of respect over the years. Even though religion and horror is my jam, possession movies are kind of exhausting for me because they all sort of do the same things and they all sort of all have the same things to say. But I thought Exorcism of Emily Rose was really smart in the way it was structured, and you can kind of view it as either mental illness or a spiritual condition, kind of depending upon which side you want to believe. And the movie does take a stance, I think, a little more firmly on the spiritual side, but it does present the story as this could be a natural phenomenon, not a supernatural possession. And I just thought that was really smart and really interesting. And over the years, I have just come to respect Scott Derrickson a lot because of Exorcism of Emily Rose in particular. I started paying attention when I saw his name, and I've read a few interviews with him. I've listened to a few podcast interviews with him, and especially when I was thinking more deeply about why I loved horror, and especially why faith and horror are both so important to me. He has a very similar sort of upbringing and viewpoint. He's quite a bit older than me. He's like maybe 15 years older than me. So like generationally, we're not the same, but I found a lot of things that he has to say about faith and horror and just the way he views horror, sort of like his philosophy of horror, if you will. He just seems to be on the same track as me. So a lot of things that he has said in interviews has just really resonated with me over the years. And, anytime you share a similar sort of worldview and life experience with somebody, then often the art they create will also resonate with you. And so he's just someone that I've followed for a long time. And he also directed Doctor Strange. So if you're not familiar with his other stuff, you've probably seen Doctor Strange, because as we know, Marvel is the juggernaut that sort of consumes everyone. But Sinister, for me, is like his masterpiece, for lack of a better word. I don't think he's ever done anything better, and I think it's very unlikely that he will ever top it. And I also want to take just a minute to mention also his writing partner, C. Robert Cargill. Is also a really interesting person. David and I love to listen to his podcast, Junk Food Cinema, where they talk about like B-movies and sort of their love of B-movies. And, he's also an interesting person. And the two of them pretty much do everything together. Cargill writes, Scott directs. So because of a lot of things, but especially because of Sinister, I have just become really interested in kind of following these guys and what they're doing. And I will say, the last thing I saw that they did together was Black Phone, and I did not love Black Phone. It's not bad by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm like, I feel like you guys, there's better stuff in there than maybe what we're getting. Anyway, back to Sinister. I first became aware of this movie, very early on. As soon as they started doing marketing for it, I remember this Red Band trailer. I think it was on Bloody Disgusting, because that's back when I was going to Bloody Disgusting probably every day just to like see what the latest stuff was. And you don't see a lot of Red Band trailers, but this one in particular, I was just sucked in. And I've since recently went back and watched that Red Band trailer, and it's still very good. Like, there's no dialogue in it. It's just music and some of the spookier scenes. And I think that's really smart because it gives you a very good sense of just the vibe of this movie. And that's really all you need. If I could get on my soapbox for a minute, The Long Legs teaser trailer did that as well, where it was just music and some scenes, and you really don't have any idea of the plot. You just get the vibe. I wish that movies would go back to making all their trailers just a vibe. You don't need to give us the plot. That's what we show up to the movie for. But anyway, so this Red Band trailer just really, really intrigued me. And I was a lot more hopeful and a lot less jaded 10 years ago about movies. And so I was very interested. And then when I went to see the movie, I was not disappointed, where I feel like now I'll watch a trailer and like it and then be like, well, I don't want to love it just based on the trailer because I wanted to be disappointed. But in the case of Sinister, I mean, it did not disappoint. I was, like I said, I was hooked from the moment I saw the trailer, and my theater experience matched it. I just was not disappointed. Another really interesting thing that caught my attention is that I noticed that this movie was rated R. But it was not rated R for nudity or language or gore or violence. It was rated R for, I think, like disturbing imagery or, something very vague. And it is quite a feat for a horror movie to be rated R just for being scary. PG-13 horror gets a lot of flack, and I think that's garbage because there's a lot of horror movies that if you took the language or the nudity out, it would be PG-13. Now, gore is another thing because blood and gore and violence do go hand in hand with the content of horror, but anybody can put nudity or language. You can have nudity or language in a comedy. It's rated R. So people who are like, oh, well, it's not horror if it's not rated R, that's not true. And interestingly enough, Scott Derrickson was shooting for a PG-13 rating with Sinister because, and this is not a direct quote, this is the gist. He said that, he loved horror movies when he was growing up, and he wanted a wide range of horror fans to be able to go see Sinister and not have the R rating kind of deter teens from being able to go and watch this movie and enjoy it. And so they specifically didn't do, language, and this isn't really a gory movie anyway, but they specifically did not put language in it, hoping for a PG-13. But then of course, when they came back and it was rated R, they were not willing to water down the story or the vibes. And so it did get an R rating, but I just remember I was like, okay, if this is rated R just purely on scares, again, I'm in, because that does not happen very often. So I remember seeing this movie in the theater, and this is one that David went with me and we both enjoyed it, and he will still rewatch this movie with me from time to time. But just what a great theater experience. In particular, I will never forget the lawnmower scene, which is one of the greatest jump scares, I think, ever in a horror film. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you can YouTube it. If hopefully you're not listening to this if you haven't seen the movie, but if you just want to, well, actually, maybe not. I might not suggest that you do that. I think it's better if you view it in the context of the whole movie, but I have sent that lawnmower scene jump scare to friends and coworkers just to startle them. And it gets me every time, even though I know it's coming. It's so well crafted that it still gets me every time. And that was just the theater viewing in a nutshell. I think it was a really fun ride, and it sort of checked all of the boxes. At its core, this is a horror movie about watching horror movies, and this is not something that I thought about when I first saw it, but it is really interesting, I think, for horror fans when we watch somebody watching a cursed film, kind of like The Ring. There's this idea that just by watching this dark content that you are somehow cursed, that you are somehow taking on this darkness, which is something I've sort of had to combat my whole life, growing up in Christian circles. Not in my own household, because as you all know, my mom is the one who got me into horror. So I never had to fight with my parents about it. But there's certainly been pushback over, in my life where people are like, oh, I don't know how you watch that. Like, I believe that stuff's real. Or do you think that's like good for your soul or like good for your spirit or whatever? And of course, to that, I always say, like, look, like, life's not all just like kittens and rainbows. Like, we don't have to just only consume candy. We can read and watch things that are challenging or difficult. I've talked about before, when I'm in a bad place, I like to watch depressing stuff. Like, it helps me work through things. And so I do think that this movie is an interesting look at that, though, and causes us to think about the things that we watch. Of course, Ellison is this sort of complicated man who we're rooting for, but his kind of priorities are not in the right place. And so he's a desperate man looking to reclaim not even fame. I think he just wants to be successful in his work, and he's a writer and he loves to write, and he just wants fulfillment and satisfaction in that. And of course, anytime you're a creative professional, or not even a creative professional, just a creative person, I think there's a struggle between, your work and it's important to you to create. Like, it's important for your happiness and your will to live. Like, you want to create, but that if you have a family, you have these family responsibilities. And so for him, he's struggling with it, and we want him to figure it out. But I think he ultimately finds himself in the position that he's in because his priorities are just not in the right place. He doesn't tell his wife the truth. He doesn't go to the police. And an interesting thing in the commentary, which if you're interested in movie commentaries at all, the Sinister commentary is great. There's a director one and there's a director-writer one. So there's two that are very good. But I can't remember if it's Cargill or Scott. One of them, though, says that they made this choice that when Ellison first starts watching the films, at first he doesn't see Bagul. Doesn't see him. He just sees the murder. And then he calls 911. And when he decides to say, never mind, there's no problem, the next time he watches the film, that's the first time he sees Bagul. And it's almost like once he's made the choice to fully engage and to not involve others, that's when Bagul shows up. And I think that's a really beautiful, kind of subtle thing in this movie, that sort of he made the choice to go down this darker road. And another, sort of complicated thing I think it touches on is just the spectacle of true crime. He's a true crime writer. And so that he's followed this true crime, and now he's going to write a book about this true crime. But again, his whole life is about these crime scenes, and it's about death and murder. And his wife makes it a point to say, hey, you need to lock your office. We don't need our children stumbling into your crime scene photo office again. So this has happened before. And it's sort of asking us some questions about consuming someone else's tragedy and misery. And I know that that's a conversation that a lot of people who are interested in true crime have had. Am I trafficking in someone else's misery? Is it okay that we view these things as entertainment? And I think, true crime speaks to, there's something human about it. There's something, we're fascinated by people that are put together wrong, and people that can commit these very strange and outside fringe acts. I think as human, we are fascinated by other humans. And so anytime there's a human on the fringe, I think it's like rubbernecking at a car crash. You can't look away. And so there is something very human about being interested in true crime, but there is also something kind of exploitative about it. So all of that stuff just makes Ellison's position kind of interesting and complicated. And I think causes us as the audience, because he's an audience and we are an audience, because of that, we can kind of put ourselves in Ellison's shoes. Because then we also think like, okay, like what would I do? You know, would I call the police? Would I tell my spouse? Would I believe this? Like, how would I handle this? Another thing from a story perspective that I think makes this movie really interesting is the simplicity of the boogeyman. The boogeyman is this age-old sort of fairy tale folklore figure that has been around, I'm gonna guess, since the beginning of mankind. It's probably where a lot of our legends and a lot of our cryptids come from. I've always been really fascinated by this sort of specter of the boogeyman. I think a lot of our slashers, of course, play on that. Michael Myers in the first one, I mean, they call him the boogeyman. Freddy Krueger is very much, I mean, he haunts your dreams. He's certainly a boogeyman, a supernatural boogeyman. And even, I think a modern day one is Slender Man, which I am endlessly fascinated by the Slender Man lore because, you know, urban legends are a really interesting phenomenon because it would always be like, pre-internet, it was like, oh, this happened to a friend of a friend, or, oh, my hometown I grew up in, this thing happened, and there was no way to like verify it or fact check it. Whereas now, if you hear somebody say, oh, this thing happened in my town, like it's very Googleable. You can find it out. You can find out what happened, what didn't happen. Those kinds of things are so much easier to debunk now. And even though that is the case, creepypastas fascinate me because it's like we still need it. We still need these urban legend campfire tales. And so instead of saying, oh, it happened to a babysitter in my hometown, which is easily verifiable, people have created this strange little corner of the internet where this like internet lore lives. And that's where Slender Man comes in. So if you're not familiar with Slender Man, like, please go check out that whole thing because the imagery is creepy, the legend is creepy, and to me, Bagul in this movie reminds me of Slender Man. He's wearing like the black suit and everything, and I think that the boogeyman device works really well in this movie. This core idea that he lures children and that he is an eater of children. I think that's just a great phrase. An eater of children. It's also a little bit eldritch because some of the cosmic horror they talk about, maybe Cthulhu, but I think other creatures too, they're called the eater of worlds. Even Pennywise the clown refers to himself as the eater of worlds. And so taking that little phrase and applying it here to Bagul as an eater of children because he specifically preys on the souls of children, there's a lot going on in the Bagul sandbox, and I'm really here for it. I also was not familiar with black metal at all before I saw this movie. I mean, in the church in the 90s, I remember hearing about like, oh, there's these like metal bands burning down churches in Sweden, like, you know, as part of the satanic panic, you know, don't listen to rock and roll music. Like, I do remember that being circulated. But that's all I knew about it. I did not know about the culture of black metal, the aesthetic of black metal. And so when I first saw Bagul, to me, it was really original. I was like, this is a really cool original figure. And then, of course, I did a little research and found out that they just wholesale lifted corpse paint from black metal bands that is Bagul's face. So if you're a black metal fan, I'm sure that was like maybe kind of tired or like kind of irritating. But for someone who had never seen that imagery before, it was very effective. And then, of course, I think just the Super 8 films also, I think, borrow a lot from the sort of DIY, grainy grittiness of black metal. This movie owes its entire aesthetic to black metal. And I want to talk a little bit more about the Super 8 films. But before I get there, I do want to say one of my criticisms, though, is that, so like Bagul, when we see Bagul in the Super 8 films, super creepy, very unsettling. Even now when I watch it, when he shows up in the shadows, or like when he's in a still image and he turns his head to look at Ellison, that is still effective, even after seeing it so many times. But when we see Bagul in like person, like when he shows up and he's just front and center, like fully lit, he looks kind of stupid. I think he loses a lot of the scare factor and becomes silly when he's standing in front of you with his face paint and his greasy hair, like in his suit. So that is something I would prefer that Bagul stay behind the film grain. I think would keep him as a more imposing figure. Because those films, those Super 8 films, I mean, they're the best thing about the movie by far. I mean, I like the characters and I like the story and all that is working. But those Super 8 films pack such a punch. Those are unique. I think they definitely stand out in that decade of horror, the 2010s. But honestly, like in my life, in all of the years I've spent watching horror movies, there just isn't a time when you see something that really hits you as like original and like unsettling. And those Super 8 films for me were remarkable. And I don't know that I've seen anything in a horror movie since then that struck such a chord with me. And I'm always looking for something like that again. And, I don't know, maybe I'm overselling it. But I have heard a lot of people say that, though, that those Super 8 films are creepy. And specifically, the music. The music combined with the grit, it's just so effective. And, of course, you're watching the dichotomy of, like, happy families slammed up against murder scene. It's just, it just, and these clips are, 30 seconds long, a minute long. It's just everything that's creepy about horror. This contrast of light and shadow, if you will, but the contrast of happy family, murder scene, creepy music, film grain. It all just works for me. And like I said, I love a vibe, I love an atmosphere, and they're just pure atmosphere. And even some of that music, I believe, Scott Derrickson has said that he did go down like the rabbit hole of black metal. And I think even some of those music pieces are maybe from black metal bands or stuff he found when he was like doing that research. So, I mean, all that stuff sort of comes from the same place, a really creepy, dark, haunted place. It's where the boogeyman lives, Some of the other things, too, I want to talk about just as far as, like, visuals go. So the Super 8 films are amazing, and those are just scary objectively. But there's some other stuff going on in this movie visually that I really love. Like, it is a dark movie, and I've heard people complain about this. They're like, it's so dark I can't see, which, definitely I did not have that problem in the theaters. With streamers, you never know what you're going to get. I feel like HBO is so dark sometimes you can't see what's going on. But anyway, I digress. I love that they chose to put this movie almost entirely in shadow. Like, there's a scene where the family is eating takeout, and it is so dark. And the family is lit, so you can see the family and you can see the table, but then you can't see what's behind them. It's almost complete blackness, and it's lit like a Renaissance painting. It looks like a Caravaggio composition, which Caravaggio is one of my favorite painters. But that's what it looks like. It's got this just beautiful cinematography, this like beautiful richness, and that is one thing that Scott Derrickson does excel at. His movies are always beautiful, even if I haven't loved some of his newer stuff. His movies are always beautiful. And so it just really is important to this movie. There's sort of this like deep jewel tone palette. There's a lot of like blues and greens, and Ellison's wearing this big chunky gray sweater, which I love. Shout out to Jen Adams from the Losers Club, Hot in a Sweater. But you've also got some rich like golden colors, which there's a lot of that golden color, of course, in the Super 8 films. Ellison's always got his whiskey. So he'll be in this sort of cold room and he's got his warm glass of whiskey and he'll have this warm light on his face from these sort of orangey 70s Super 8 films. And then just deep, dark, just black shadows behind him. And it really creates some just beautifully striking images. And there's also a shot where he falls asleep on the sofa at night and there's a time lapse of the sun coming up behind him. And again, he's in his dark, cool toned house. And then this bright orange ball sun just comes up behind him in the window. And it's just this beautiful, beautiful shot. And I think that's another reason why I return to this movie just again and again, because it's just such a beautiful movie. Also, I talked about Ellison a little bit, and I do really like and relate to Ellison's character, but honestly, I think the characters in this movie are all pretty good. The family does feel pretty real. The kids are kids. I love that he has his sweet little artistic daughter who wants to draw on the walls. And of course, he's a cool dad. He's an artistic dad. So he's like, yeah, sure, you can draw on the walls. I love that little, their relationship's really sweet. His wife, I think is a great character, and, she clearly supports him and wants to see him succeed. And she's willing to sort of gallivant around, to do whatever they need to do to support his book. But then she calls him out when he lies to her, when he's not putting his family first. And there's a scene where they're in their bedroom having an argument, and it just feels like such a real argument. And like, she is very clearly an equal to him. And I really appreciate that. I think the strength of this family and sort of just the realism of this family is another reason why it works really well. And Ellison Ellison does not get out soon enough. But like, when push comes to shove and like he sees ghost children in his attic, he's like, nah, we're out. And so they do the smart thing. They leave the house. They leave the haunted house, right? That's always, why don't these people leave? Why don't people move? So in this movie, they do that. They leave. They get out, right? He's like, whatever. I don't know how we're going to pay the bills, but it doesn't matter. We're going to get out of here. I'm going to take care of my family, and we'll figure it out. And of course, that proves to not be the solution. Another great character, I would be remiss if I did not mention Deputy So-and-so, James Ransone. He is like the beating heart of this movie. This is not a funny movie, but Deputy So-and-so gives just a little bit of levity. And I love that he is kind of innocent and naive, but he's not a dum-dum, He's like sort of a Barney Fife, but he's like a capable Barney Fife. And so I think that he plays really well as someone to help Ellison discover what's going on. And so every time he's on screen, he's just a joy. And again, the scene after the beautiful sunrise scene, Deputy So-and-so comes over and has a conversation with Ellison. And that whole exchange between the two of them is just lovely. It's just really well written. The two of them are great together. So shout out Deputy So-and-so. So I said I had some criticisms, and I have not been doing much criticizing because one of my criticisms was Bagul looks kind of stupid. So I talked about that already. And my other criticism, and this is, I'll say it's a big criticism, the ending. I think the ending has some problems. I do not have an issue with like the main thrust of the ending, which is that, spoiler alert, all the missing kids are the murderers of their family. All the missing kids killed their family and were abducted by Bagul, basically. And so lo and behold, little Ashley, who has told her parents, I saw Stephanie, she's being recruited by Bagul. And Ashley ends up dispatching her family. And I don't have a problem with that. That's a dark ending. And I love a dark ending. And this movie, I feel like, is a dark movie and it has dark content. So I'm totally fine with the fact that Ashley kills her family and everyone dies. My problem comes in with the execution of that story, because the reason this movie is so unsettling is because we've seen little bits and pieces. We've seen the murders. We've seen the murders being carried out, but we haven't seen the person doing the murdering, right? And Bagul, we've seen Bagul, but Bagul's been in the corner, in the shadows. We don't know exactly how Bagul recruits the kids, or like, okay, well, how does that work? So once they kill their family, how do they become, little minions of Bagul? Like, how do the mechanics of that work? We don't need to know the mechanics of how that works, because Professor Jonas has already explained to us that Bagul lives in images and Bagul curses the images. And when you consume the images of Bagul, he slowly feeds on your soul, right? That's a big abstract supernatural idea. And anytime you try to explain that too much, it sort of falls apart. And this is, again, goes back to when we see Bagul in the real world front and center, he looks kind of stupid. So when you start to explain the mechanics of how this all works, it's not as scary anymore. It sort of falls apart. So like, personally, I do not need to see like Ashley with the camera looking down at her family, and then she's got an axe in the other hand, and then we watch her draw on the box, and then we watch Bagul come out of the film and like carry her into the film. Like, that's too much. That's way too much, right? So here's what I would do with this ending to make it a little more subtle and a little more consistent with the rest of the film. I think once Ellison gets off the phone with Deputy So-and-so, that's when he sees like the glowy liquid at the bottom of his coffee cup. And there's that "Good night, Daddy" from Ashley. Well, at that point, we as the audience, we know what's going on. Oh, his daughter has drugged him, right? So we know what's going to happen. We know, oh gosh, she's the kid. She's going to be the missing kid in this family. She's going to kill her family. So we know that from the coffee cup, the "Good night, Daddy," and then Ellison passes out. I think the next thing we need to cut to, we don't need to see all that stuff with Ashley and the camera and Bagul and blah, 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 blah. Just cut all that out. So Ellison drinks the coffee, Ellison passes out. The next scene should be somebody moving into Ellison's family's house. And, there could be a short scene where they're talking about, oh gosh, yeah, that true crime writer murdered in his own house. Like, can you believe it? Blah, blah, blah. Whatever. We don't need a lot. Just a little bit, so that we know this new family has moved into Ellison's house, Ellison's murder house, basically. And just like we saw at the beginning of this movie, they're unpacking, their kids are running around, whatever. And so one of the parents, mom or dad, either one, doesn't matter, goes up to the attic to take something up there. And oh, lo and behold, there's the projector and the box of films. What's this? And he opens it up and he sees the house painting 12. And he puts the reel on, and that's when we see the murder of Ellison and his family. So basically, I just think it would be scarier to witness that murder, the murder of Ellison and his family, the same way we witnessed all the other murders. And then we just know, it's just implied that that Ashley was taken by Bagul, just like all the other children were. Again, we just don't need to see Bagul swoop her up and like take her into the movie. We just don't need it. So that's the way I would end it. A little more subtle, little more creepy. And of course, I would take out the Bagul jump scare at the end, which the fun thing about this movie is it was an early Blumhouse movie. So the budget was small, but the director got final cut. And I believe Scott said that's the only studio note that they like. That's the only note the studio gave him, or it's the only note they took. But that little Bagul jump scare at the end, that was a studio note. So it's not totally egregious, but it does take away from that final shot. We see that box of reels sitting in the attic, and that's a very creepy shot. And I feel like it's sort of it's totally undercut by the Bagul jump scare. But anyway, that's my big ending, my big fix, if you will, for the ending, which I still love this movie. And knowing that the ending is what it is, it doesn't irritate me like it did the first time I saw it. But I think if the ending was as, sort of subtle and creepy as the rest of this movie, it would be, like 10 out of 10 no notes from me. But as you've heard me say many, many times, the ending of a movie is really important to me. If a movie sticks the landing, I can forgive a lot. If I love a movie but it doesn't stick the landing, it just, it leaves a little bit of bad taste in my mouth. But man, I've gone on for nigh on an hour talking about this movie. So clearly I love it. Clearly it's special to me. Like I said, I think Scott Derrickson definitely has a great style and a great eye that I really dig. And even though he has not made a movie that I love since Sinister, I'm going to continue to keep an eye on him and be interested in what he's doing. When you find a filmmaker that vibes with you and that resonates with you, of course, you always want to see what they're doing next and you want to see them succeed. So I'll be interested to see what he does next, what he and Cargill do next. So it's time for a few recommendations. If you watch Sinister and you like Sinister, there's some other stuff you can check out. Movies about cursed objects. I already mentioned The Ring, which is of course about a cursed film, so very similar to this movie. The Ring's a classic, Another great one is Oculus, about a cursed mirror by ya boy Mike Flanagan. Based on a Stephen King short story. That's not official. It's very similar to The Reaper's Image that Stephen King wrote, which is also about a haunted mirror. Another movie from this general time period that I think has a similar tone is The Strangers. The Strangers, such a great home invasion movie, but again is like subtle. There's like stuff going on in the background. Feels pretty real. The relationship feels real. Has a dark ending. I love the ending of that movie. Would not make any changes to the ending of The Strangers. Another one I mentioned already, Long Legs. It's another movie with a lot of vibes, and it sort of doesn't matter if you like the plot or not. Osgood Perkins, also visionary, also good at the vibes. So if you haven't seen Long Legs yet, check it out. Manhunter, which is a Michael Mann film that was based on the novel Red Dragon. So there was the movie Red Dragon with Ralph Fiennes, which is great. Manhunter is just an earlier version of that story, and there are a couple of shots in Manhunter that directly influenced Sinister. Specifically, there's this shot where the killer is like walking up the stairs, and that shot is almost exactly the same as shot in Sinister. Last but not least, I'm going to recommend a documentary called Until the Light Takes Us. And it is a fantastic documentary about black metal. And Scott Derrickson saw this documentary, and it was a huge influence on the visual style of Sinister. after I watched this documentary, like I said, I sort of went down a deep dive of just like the cultural aesthetic of black metal. And it's just really fascinating. It's such a fascinating subculture, such a fascinating look, lots of weirdness going on there. And of course, I mean, I always love a good documentary. So Until the Light Takes Us. So that's a wrap on Sinister. Coming up, you know, we're almost into spooky season. It's right around the corner. And I have a couple of guests coming on. So next month's episode is going to be It Follows. And good friend of the show, Hydraberg from A Cut Above, is going to come on. So he chose It Follows. I've been on A Cut Above umpteen times. Hydraberg has never been on the show before. And so I said, it's finally time. Come on, let's do a Fundamental Frights. And then, well, I'm not going to tell you yet what's coming after that. But after It Follows, the next episode is going to be kind of a transition into spooky season. So stay tuned. You know, don't move into a murder house. If you do, don't watch the creepy Super 8 films that you find in your attic. And until next time, stay spooky.